So John, we're in this amazing pie shop, but let's not talk about pie shops, let's talk about chicken shops.
I suppose, Jake, I'm responsible for you wanting to talk about chicken shops in a pie shop because I made that link in an essay I wrote in your wonderful book.
Yes.
And I think what I was thinking about there was that I thought it was really curious when I did a walk around some of the what I call the dead pie shops, the sites of former pie shops, closed pie shops, that a number of them actually were still selling cheap, accessible food to the working class community of the area. It's just that it was fried chicken.
Yeah.
And I thought that was, in a way, I thought that kind of represented a sort of continuity, because it's easy to get a bit sort of misty-eyed about, there used to be a lovely pie shop here. This is a beautiful pie shop. And it's been replaced with this kind of fast food, emporium with its kind of plastic and its bright lights and stuff. But then when I actually went into one of the pie shops in Roman Road, when I went into one of the chicken shops, I should say, in Roman Road, and I had a $1.99, I think was it, or even a 99p chicken meal, I thought, lots of young people growing up now who might not have experienced pie mash, this is probably fulfilling the same function that the pie shops fulfilled, actually. So I looked at them differently from that point.
And I like that way of looking at things. I think that's your perspective and the way you look at things is really endearing. And I wondered if we've often talked about pie shops, chicken shops and nostalgia, and I wonder if people will one day look back on chicken shops in the same way.
Oh, 100%. Of course they will. I mean, if you look at, there's an enormous culture around chicken shops already. And I think you'd probably find people being nostalgic for the way chicken shops were 10 years ago, even perhaps. And I did a walk recently where we walked along Green Street, through Forest Gate, Upton Park, and there used to be a chicken shop there called Al Farouk's, dead opposite Upton Park Tube Station.
Yep.
And they used to sell like your classic chicken shop, but then they would also do bits of Indian food, so you could get chicken, fried chicken, and dal.
There used to be an Al Farouk's on Levers Road as well.
So we're already getting nostalgic for chicken shops in the past.
Yeah. And what apart from pie shops and chicken shops, what else makes you feel nostalgic, John?
Nostalgia is an emotion or a sentiment that I think I've tried to resist in the past. And I think now, finally, it's so obviously prevalent in my work that I'm just now, like even like this year, embracing it. I think the lockdown has made me embrace it and not want to resist it. When I felt myself getting nostalgic, I've tended to try and shy away. I think probably because I'm actually going to be, I'm disclosing now, I'm going to be turning 50 next year. So it's like, I think you're entitled to be a little bit nostalgic.
Young people don't really get nostalgic as much as, older people, surely.
No, but I think they possibly do now, actually. I think it's funny talking to my sons, because I've got a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old, and they get nostalgic. So, like games, for example, for the old versions of COD and things like that, you know what I mean? So I think nostalgia is always there, but I think a lot of nostalgia, when people say, it was better in the past, what they mean was, it was better when I was young.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's fair to say, because every generation has done it. So really what you're pining for is your own youth and the particularities of your own youth. I think the thing with my generation, to kind of make it particular, is I'm really interested in this idea of nostalgia for lost futures. It's sort of like an evolution of the idea of hauntology. And you think when I was a teenager, a young teenager in the 80s and growing up through the 80s, there was a very strong idea of the future. There was a lot of optimism about what the future would be. Not necessarily optimism, but there was a very strong idea of the future. And there's a lot of books and movies looking at the future. The future was a very strong theme. The classic sci-fi films, are from the 80s, aren't they?
Yep.
So I'm going to say, I think a lot of them were dystopias, I guess, if you think of things like Blade Runner. But it was a very prevalent thing when I was growing up. So we were really excited about what was coming in the new millennium.
Yep.
And so, if you look at Blade Runner, and Philip K. Dick is a smart cookie. Look at his vision for 2019. And technologically, we're nowhere near that. The only thing we've just embraced in lockdown is video calling.
Yeah.
Aside from that, it's a future that never realised itself. And I think a lot of people my age are nostalgic for that vision of the future, this kind of science fiction future that we thought we'd be living in by the time we were the age I am now.
Yeah.
And it's never happened. All we've got is iPhones.
Yeah.
You know, and that's it. And you know, the environment being destroyed.
Yeah. And maybe that's affected by all the information that we have now, because you can fact check all the technology and all the information you couldn't necessarily do so well in the 80s.
It's partly that, and I think it's partly because it was a vision. It was a romantic vision, partly, and it was. I think there's the. I think if you were to really drill down into it, a lot of that vision of the future that I get nostalgic for, and other people of my generation do get nostalgic for, was a response to the constant, persistent threat of nuclear Armageddon.
Yeah.
Which actually is funny because my 17-year-old son, when I discussed this with him, he says, well, that's still there. It's still as much of a threat today as it was then, but it's just we don't think about it and we don't talk about it.
Well, it's not a new threat.
No, it's not a new threat, exactly. So in a way, a lot of those visions of the future were post-apocalyptic, you know, or they were post some sort of disaster. So we should be grateful that that disaster hasn't happened.
Yes.
But what we've had in a way is the kind of the drip of incremental increase of practical everyday technologies of where we need it.
But tell me about this tape here. You've got some analog cassette tape.
Well, I was thinking...
That's proper nostalgia.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? It's an album by The Dusk. And I was hugely into The when I was a teenager. And up to my early 20s. I think this album came out probably in 92, I think, 91, 92. But I was thinking about it because I think one of the interesting things about this year, as I heard a statistic the other day that said that sales of vinyl records this year were the highest for 30 years.
Wow.
Which I thought was amazing. I thought, well, what was happening in 1990? So I thought, oh, hang on, what was happening in 90? The last time vinyl sales were higher than they are at the moment. And I thought, well, that's roughly when this would have come out. This is from that era. And I thought, it's interesting that the popular format then was cassette tapes. So if you think in that time, in that 30 years, that we've gone from cassette tapes that were replaced by... So cassette tapes really were replacing vinyl at the time. And then not long after that, within 5 or 6 or 7 years, they've been replaced by CDs. And then within another 5 years of that, they were replaced by digital downloads.
Yep.
But now the dominant thing is vinyl, and you think, what's driving that? You know, why are people who are not old enough to remember cassette tapes? And actually, cassettes are making a comeback as well. A lot of experimental musicians and stuff, they now release on cassette only, which is really interesting. Because it's not a particularly practical format. If anyone with a lot of old cassette tapes will know if you try and play them.
Yep.
And I think that return to vinyl must be driven by a sense of nostalgia. You know,
It's weird though, like you say, but how can someone have nostalgia for something they never had in the first place? It's like neo nostalgia.
if you like, yeah.
Well, it's amazing to be here in this pie shop.